Welcome back to another devlog of Cosmic Reach. Before we continue, I want to tell you a little story. I recently played Stardew Valley, and although I've watched gameplay, I never took the time to play the game for myself. I decided that since I was new to the game anyways, I would add an extra challenge, to learn a new language while doing it. I settled on German. Since English is a Germanic language, I thought it would be the easiest one included in the game to start with. I wanted to see how far I could get without any outside learning material, only the game itself. And while I didn't learn much other than a few choice words, it just made the game less fun. But it was a valuable experience, seeing how much not knowing a language can impact the enjoyment of a game. I'm sure if I was more of a fan of Stardew Valley, or if I took the time to practice German outside of the game, it would have been better for me, however. The lesson learned is that having the game in your native language is very important. Since the last devlog, I released Cosmic Reach as a pre-alpha, and the amount of bugs that needed to be fixed was astounding. Having a game public, as opposed to just developing it alone, is a fundamentally different experience, but I think it's a necessity, so that focus can be put where it's needed for the game, instead of whatever piques my curiosity. Of course, with people worldwide playing the game, now is a good time to implement language support, for more than just English. But how do we go about doing this? In Java, characters are defined as Unicode, which assigns a number to each character, independent of the computer's configured language. When we implemented font rendering, we took the character number as an index to an array to look up where in the font texture to look for the letter. That works well for the first 256 characters, but we need more. In particular, I received Russian and Ukrainian translations, which use the Cyrillic alphabet. I split Unicode into textures of 256 characters so that they are easy to edit and find where in the texture a given character belongs. But not being a speaker of a language that uses these non-Latin characters, I found it a challenge to draw these while looking legible. Now, in order to have translations submitted by users, I put all the translation files and font textures into an MIT licensed project, which came in particularly handy as the Cyrillic characters were contributed by players, so my previous concerns of legibility were minimized. I only had to put the drawn characters in the right position for the Unicode placement. Now, we need a way to have the translation files, and as per usual, we'll choose JSON, because it's both human readable and easy to parse. Each file just contains a set of keys and values to be translated. At the start, there's a section called metadata, which is used for the name of the language, and a value called fallbacks. Translations are a moving target, especially as new things get added to the game, so the fallbacks value defines which languages to fall back on, in the case that a translation is not provided for the file. If no fallback has a translation, then it defaults to the game's chosen language, which in this case is English. This system has proved fantastic so far, but it isn't without its problems. Although it achieved its goal of a quick and dirty font implementation, it's completely infeasible for Japanese, Korean, Chinese, and other similar languages due to the sheer amount of characters that would have to be drawn. Furthermore, the way the font renderer works, it doesn't account for languages that are supposed to be read right to left, like Hebrew and Arabic. Lastly, if a mod wants to add translations for their own functionality, the way it's set up is that they would have to overwrite the whole language file, meaning only one mod can do so at a time. This is holding me back from adding tooltips, since mod will want tooltips for their own blocks, which in turn requires translation files, even if it's just English only. No system is perfect, so it's important to point out these flaws so that possible solutions can be planned for the future. In the last video, I had a vote between multiplayer, a wiring system, and infinite world height, and you guys chose multiplayer. Multiplayer is challenging because everything needs to take synchronization into account, so I began to refactor the game to prepare for it. I originally started the game as a renderer, and so the entire structure of the game was focused around that. But multiplayer requires a server, which should not have to do anything with rendering at all. That's why refactoring was needed, because it would be incredibly wasteful to run a full game just to host a server. I needed to keep the logic separate while keeping the performance the same. I'll give you an example of what I mean here. The chunks were accessed by the renderer, and each chunk stored some mesh data to be passed on for batching. If I had kept everything related to the mesh data client side, I would have to either create an entity component system, or map the chunk to chunk meshes, sacrificing either my development time or performance of the game. Luckily, there's a better solution, and it doesn't require the server to know anything about how the meshing or rendering is implemented. Interfaces are like a promise, which says, you can count on me to do this method, without actually specifying how it will be done. This is extremely useful, because by keeping the chunk implementation shared between client and server, and adding a reference to the mesh interface in the chunk, we keep things very simple. and only have to actually implement the method for the client. A very similar thing was done for creating block models, since the server doesn't need to care about textures. While the client implements these interfaces, these can be safely null server-side, not requiring any additional dependencies. With that, we separated client and server, setting up the groundwork to prepare for multiplayer. Over the last 2 months, the game has progressed fantastically, with a better inventory, multiple worlds, generation types, consistent movement, a plethora of mods, and countless bug fixes. However, I came to a realization that the bug fixing and engine work was getting to me a little, especially when trying to fix it for faulty drivers and Mac computers. Because we're in this for the long run, I need to make sure that I avoid burnout, and ensure the game is fun for me as well, to give me the motivation to keep going. This is why I took the decision to postpone multiplayer for now, in favor of survival mode, because I think it needs to be more than just a fancy block rendering engine. Don't worry, we can keep the transition to a multiplayer game simple as long as we follow the rule of keeping client and game logic separate. If it's not UI, controls, or rendering, it probably doesn't belong in the client code. The focus now is to find a satisfying game loop. My initial hunch is that we need a health system, at least one enemy, a day-night cycle, and having finite items in the inventory, along with a way to obtain every single block in the game so far. If we accomplish this, it will be a basic game loop, to which I can pivot back to multiplayer and make use of the work we've put in so far. Now let's look at the comments. On account systems, I made a community post talking about why I postponed multiplayer, citing also the fact that having an authentication infrastructure would be a huge challenge I would need to seriously think about. But this comment here encouraged me to look into other solutions. It turns out, with Steam and Itch's API, an account system wouldn't even be required, saving me a huge amount of time and worry in the long run. So thank you everyone for pointing me in the right direction. This comment expressed how enjoyable multiplayer is by sharing experiences with those you love. It's this kind of thing that drives me forward more than anything, because any good art should either be good for the soul or bring people together. This may sound a bit cliche, but you'd be surprised how much media we consume that does the exact opposite to us. This comment appreciated how the effort to make Cosmic Reach was pushing right through, whereas many voxel projects fizzle out. This is a difficult thing. I'm making a game and an engine from scratch, but none of it would be possible without your help. It's a learning process, and there will be many road bumps and mistakes along the way. But remember, we're here for the long run. You can download the game on itch, and we have a Discord as well as a subreddit, with links in the description below. Next time, we'll work on survival features, which hopefully the video should come quicker now that the panic with the post-launch bug fixing is over. For now, stay tuned, take care, and I'll see you next time.